Good evening. My name is Jason Wallace. I'm the pastor of Christ Presbyterian Church here in the Salt Lake Valley, and we welcome you to another installment of the Ancient Paths. Last week we started talking about the public education system and its challenge to the Christian faith, and it is our privilege to have with us this evening Mrs. Sabrina Reynolds. She's an educator and has been very gracious to join us and talk about these issues this evening. Ms. Reynolds, great to have you with us.
Hey, thank you.
Now, one of the complaints that we sometimes get is that we're not educators.
Right.
We have not been initiated into the priesthood. We don't have the credentials supposedly to be able to comment on these things. What's your background?
Well, I have my bachelor's degree in English and history, and then I have a master's degree in education, all from Southern universities. Christian Brothers University is where I received my master's, and the University of Alabama. I got my bachelor's degree there.
Well, I won't say anything against the Tide tonight, even though I'm from Georgia. But have you actually taught in the public school system?
I have. I've taught in both private schools, a private Christian school, a private secular school, and the public school system here in Utah.
Now, how did we get a public school system in the first place? Because many people assume that there has always been a public education system, or that everyone was wandering around in ignorance prior to one.
No, the schools in the United States started off as small community schools chartered by the churches. And when their communities reached a certain size, the church would say, you guys need to build a school, and you need to hire a teacher, and you need to educate your children. Mostly it was because they felt it important that the children be able to read and understand the Word of God. And so reading and understanding Scripture was very important. And then as communities grew and areas grew, you saw more of the private school sector come in to play, and they were very competitive, very competitive. Curriculum was always being updated and changed, and even some of the middle-class families that people might think now could never have afforded private education back then were receiving it. Otherwise, people taught in the homes, that we still have homeschooling today. They taught in the homes, or they hired in tutors. And the whole idea of the compulsory education didn't come about until the late 1800s, and didn't get a good stronghold here until after around 1920 in the United States.
Most people are surprised to know that 100 years ago, the majority of people graduating from high school weren't actually going to public schools, were they?
No.
This is the irony for me. I mean, we're going to see more of this later on, but schools were initially founded to promote Christianity, to teach children to read so that they could read the Bible.
Yes.
And to function in society. And it's all centered around a very Christian, godly perspective. And now the system's been completely turned on its head, where it is promoting a very different religion.
Yeah, and even some of the modern, the fathers of modern education, as we like to, I like to call them, like Horace Mann is one of the names that pops up a lot. Even he believed in the teaching of the Bible during the original establishment of these school systems, but he wanted to cut and paste it so that only certain aspects of it were taught to sort of fit the agenda of the times. You know, they were trying to make a social community where everyone was on equal ground. And so if you had conflicting religious discussions in class, then it didn't make Johnny and Betsy equal. And someone had to be right or wrong, and that was not something they were looking for in the new system, where everyone needed to be peaceful and get along.
Well, tell us a little bit about Horace Mann. He's called the father of American public education, and he's touted as this great hero. Was he a great hero?
When you read his personal journal, when he received the position to be head of the Massachusetts, I believe it was Massachusetts School Board, he wrote, I have an opportunity to help, change the future. I have a chance to do all these great things for men. But one of his focuses was to mold children, catch them at a young age, and change what their families might be teaching them, because the idea of individualistic thought and the idea that each person in America could have their own, it sort of went against the grain of this new social structure that they wanted. Imagine a big metropolitan city where you've got factory workers and they're all coming in and they have all these different beliefs, you're more likely to have mismanagement in that sense where they're arguing and they're fighting over it. But if you can wipe that clean and you have everyone going to schools and being educated with the same thoughts and given the exact same information, now you have a more peaceful environment, work environment. And to put out workers was basically one of the fundamental reasons for starting public education, was to train children to sit quietly, to follow orders, and to go through the progression as they were told. And that makes a great factory worker. You don't get mad when you sit for hours, you know?
Horace Mann was a Unitarian, and,
Yes.
and part of this self-appointed elite of New England in the first part of the 19th century, they had this very superior view to everyone around them.
Yes.
And I know he was also a very vocal critic of historic Orthodox Christianity, and particularly the South. He really did totally rework education from the way it had been, where people were taught to think critically and to deal with philosophy and theology. I mean, it seems as if they had this view that so much of the confusion in the world came from these lesser beings having the ability to use logic.
Yeah, well, you know, there's two sides to that. I think that you're absolutely right there. And they also believe that if you can compartmentalize the information, then it's a lot easier to control. If you control the input, it's easier to control the output. And they didn't believe that the things that were being taught were going to move our society forward, that it would cause more divisiveness. And in order to progress in this new industrial age that they were trying to forge, they didn't need people to question authority. They didn't need people to look at a situation and say, I could make this better, and become a competitor, right? They needed people who would click that time card and go to work until the whistle blows. And so,
More like cattle.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you know, if you take a look at our system now, we sort of get chugged through, don't we? You know, from one grade to the next. And even with social promotion now, a lot of kids are just getting shuffled through and they come out with no skills. And we've even lost the jobs. We used to train in the 1930s to the 50s. We used to actually have technical training in our high schools. So they would go through junior high and then they would start beauty school. And when they finished high school, they would be able to be a beautician. But we've really cut all that out as well.
This whole compartmentalizing of students.
Yes.
This isn't the way it was originally in public or private schools, was it?
No. Students were actually, it was more of open source. I don't know. People are maybe familiar with open source and computer programming because something's out there and it's free for everyone to use. Open source learning has the same sort of idea behind it, is that the student takes the 100 hours it takes to learn to read and write and do basic math, and then they decide where they want to go with that. You know, we have some of our best musicians, some of our greatest writers, our philosophical thinkers. Can you imagine I mean, I've been looking for a long time for the next big philosophical thinker of our time, and you know, they're not really out there, probably because they got their 100 hours to learn to read and write, and then they were told they had to study this much history, this much science, this much math, you know, and you got to take your PE because we got to keep you physically fit. So kids really don't have the opportunity to dig deep into things that they have passion for, and so we're seeing a lot less of the greats of the different areas, especially the arts.
The idea that many people have is that the literacy rate prior to Horace Mann was atrocious, and that people were illiterate, people were ignorant, and it's the public school system that has brought everything up to the level that we now enjoy.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a misnomer as well. Actually, I think Massachusetts, which is one of our most liberal states, and it really has been throughout history, they had a 97% literacy rate, almost 98% before compulsory education. And then afterwards, just a few decades later, that literacy rate dropped to 91%. Now, there's still 91% literacy, but lost. You've lost ground. And there's a lot of different theories out to why the numbers are there and the way that they are. But it's pretty universal. We should be seeing, with this wonderful education system and all this money being pumped into it every single year, our children should all be literate. We should have a 100% literacy rate. We should be churning out, the best minds of the world, and yet we're importing the IT guys, and we're importing people from other countries to fit those roles, those high-paying roles that we should be bringing our own students in for.
And the literacy rate in the inner cities has dropped dramatically over this time period, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, not just. I mean, in Massachusetts, you still have a high literacy rate, but when you move into the inner cities, functional literacy drops down to closer to 50%, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah. And by the time an average student finishes their 12 years of high school, in the United States in general on average, they really have about an 8th grade education, if you're looking at the amount of knowledge they have. And you would think, we're also putting a lot more students into colleges, but a study was done, and I apologize for not remembering the person who did the study, but I can get that information to you. A study was done by an organization that was interested in college output. And so they looked at major universities throughout the United States, measured freshmen coming in, seniors coming out, and found that there was either no gain intellectually or academically, or a loss. And so even the money and things that we're putting into our colleges and sending our kids there, we're still not gaining. So there's something structurally wrong with the way that our school system is working right now.
Now let's keep the focus historically for a
Okay.
moment. Did the ideas of the modern American school system originate here in America?
No. They are German-based, and from Prussia specifically.
And what was the idea that the Prussians had about these things?
Well, the word has it that they were not very happy with Napoleon's defeat, and they found that their soldiers on the ground would not follow orders. When they would find themselves in jeopardy, they would generally lean toward their own instincts. And so the commanders noted that, and the government decided that they needed to change it. So they turned their school system into a very militaristic structure in order to teach kids at a very early age, kindergarten, that's a German word, the garden of children that they can mold and grow. They take them immediately and start training them to take orders, training them to work in groups and sit in their desks and do what they're supposed to do. And they also started giving them the information that they needed to know and telling them what was important. So no longer in Germany did you see a soldier out on the battlefield go, oof, this is not really what I want to do, and like make a choice. It's all about following orders and moving forward. And the Industrial Revolution sparked that idea that it was important to have a society that knew their place. They could take orders. They could, go to work. They would go to war.
Could be good worker bees.
Good worker bees is exactly it. And if you look at some of the things written by Carnegie and Rockefeller, our great President Woodrow Wilson, and the like,
A lapsed Presbyterian.
they spoke openly about the fact that they were not seeking education in the sense of enlightenment. They were seeking schooling in the sense of training. And so we walked away from enlightened education into school training, and that's where we are now, even 150 so years later.
To me, it goes back to Horace Mann and this whole Unitarian kind of idea that they are the self-appointed elite.
Yeah.
Now, every society has an elite, but traditionally those elites develop by merit and through hard work and things like this. This is a self-appointed, enlightened elite that they have thrown off the shackles of Christianity, thrown off the shackles of tradition. And it really helps polarize society where you have this elite that is running things, and we're turning our children over. The state becomes the most important thing.
Right.
And
Patriotism.
not the family.
Yes.
And definitely not the individual, except the individual against the family that can be manipulated by the state. But they're not getting a good education, are they?
Not in my opinion. Now, some students do. You do have students who make it through the public school system. You have students who, for whatever reason, and there are some studies and some theories out there, their parents are a little more wealthy, and so they have tutors that come in and help them, or they have family discussions, roundtable discussions at dinner, and they talk about topics that are, a little more, I guess, highbrowed or whatever. They discuss economics at the dinner table. But for whatever reason, there are those students who go through the system and they're fine. But that's a small percent. And you look at the other kids who just get drowned. And that's the thing that this was supposed to fix, because the whole Horace Mann himself was very excited to be able to save the poor, to send the poor and the middle class and the rich families to school in the common school, which he called it, was supposed to end class warfare and supposed to give everyone an even playing field. But the wealthy said, no, we don't want our kids going to the common school. So, of course, they just popped them out and spent the money to put them in, the elite private school systems that we see that have sprung up all over the country in response to that as well.
One of the things that I had intended to bring this evening that if people are interested, they can look it up on the internet. Mm-hmm. When you go back and look at the materials that were used in schools 150 years ago, in mathematics, they were teaching algebra in the 3rd grade.
Yeah.
They were teaching geometry. And
they were reading Socrates and Aristotle and Plato. And
yes.
These are 7-year-olds.
And they were teaching in 4th and 5th grade how to discount receivables, how to figure the present value of an annuity, all kinds of complex things that generally aren't taught until at least the 2nd year of college now.
Right.
I have a number of examples from 3rd grade arithmetic books that I have put in front of at least 8 or 9 different college students. None of them could answer because they've never been taught to think mathematically.
Right.
I'm curious what your view is. We went through this revolution of education back in the 60s and 70s. We abandoned phonics even before then.
Right. Whole word learning.
Yeah, psycholinguistics, look-say, and all the other wonderful catch terms.
Yes.
What was the purpose of that?
Wow.
In your view? I mean, that's a loaded question.
Honestly, I think that the idea of critical thinking is dangerous, and when you there's some theories that are out there. There's lots of contradictory theories. One is that the Catholic religion, with all the immigrants coming in, and there were lots of different religions, and that they were dangerous because you have all of these different things going out there, and we all know that lots of wars have been fought over religious, issues. And then you have the industrialists, and they need workers, and they don't need workers who are going to question their orders. They don't need workers who are going to ask for a raise. They need the guys who are going to come in, nose to grindstone, get it done, and then go home. And so I believe that it was maybe a combination of all the different things that are out there. I think we had a social change with all the different, immigrants coming in, bringing their own religions, and maybe the need for the melting pot, which is, to me, something that can't really happen, but we can force it on people.
Yeah,
education is the best way to do it.
The Soviets did a wonderful job of that.
Yeah, exactly. And so, in my opinion, I really think that critical thinking was a hazard. And in order to sort of, I guess, make everything run the way they wanted, this little utopian society, then free thinking, questioning, and deep reasoning had to be eliminated. And it's great if you take a look at our history books now. They've done a fantastic job. Do you know they can cover the Civil War in 18 pages? Now that, to me, that's amazing. And so I look at these things, and everything, not just have they compartmentalized our children by separating them by 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, like that makes any rational sense at all, because all children develop at different stages in their lives, but they've also done this with our knowledge. And no longer do kids have a wealth of books to choose from. They have their textbook, they have 18 pages, and this is the Civil War. And so to me, it's very, it's very hard to deal with when I want to give my students more. and I end up doing a lot more extra research and bringing in, outside materials to supplement.
One of the things that strikes me is that, are they going back to phonics at all in the public schools? Or are they still just reworking Look-Say?
I don't know, because I teach secondary school and I'm not really familiar with the primary school structure, but I would guess no, and I would guess there's not a lot of focus on actual writing technique either, because my sixth graders, I can tell you when I taught sixth grade honors lit, my sixth graders did not know what nouns and verbs were in a sentence. And that's, simple. You should know those things, the subject and the verb, that.
Yeah. For those who don't understand what I'm talking about with phonics, we actually have a language that the vast majority of it can simply, letters have sounds.
Yes.
Now we have a number of different languages that have contributed to English, and so sometimes those pronunciations are a little awkward.
Right.
But generally speaking, we have a language that you just sound out the letters and you get the word. And it doesn't take that many tries before you get it correct. But they're teaching reading as if our words were hieroglyphics.
Right.
That they're just arbitrary symbols that when you combine a C, an A, and a T, that whole word means cat.
Right.
And it's ridiculous.
Well, memorization and whole word reading were part of Mann and Dewey. All of these guys, they really pushed it. Memorization was used by the Prussians as well, because they didn't want critical thinking about stuff. They just wanted kids to memorize the verse and give it back. And that's also great for training exercises in the military as well. You have them memorize what they need, their coordinates, what they need to do, what their orders are. They can say it back to you. You don't want them to think any further, and that's what's important.
One of our ruling elders is a professor who's taught ethics at the university level, and what he says is 90% of his students parrot back what they have been taught in public schools, and they have absolutely no basis for critiquing their own position.
Right.
They simply repeat the value system they've been taught in public school, and they find it completely unimaginable that anyone could hold any other position.
Right.
And he says they have absolutely no ethical defense against a tyrant.
They probably wouldn't be able to recognize a tyrant, actually, because our society has been taught that this is your authority structure, and this is what you need to follow, and to question it is wrong. To question it is bad. If you look at the structure in school, the teacher, by the way, teachers used to be facilitators of learning. They were there to help students to clarify any kind of thing that was going on or a question that they had. They were there to, help guide them through the things that, they needed to do to accomplish a goal. Now teachers are these authoritative figures. They stand in the front of the classroom and they say, this is important. This is what you need to know for your test, right? So to question anything outside of what you need to know for your test, if you think about the system that we've set up, what student would want to? You've got this test coming up. This is the information you need to know for the test. So what if this one little thing is cool? You don't have time for it. You got to just get on to the next test. And so we've set it up that way. So students who maybe would have that curiosity and want to go a little further really don't have the time to do it.
We're going to come back to this, but I want to go ahead and open up the phone lines. If you'd like to join in the conversation, we're talking about public education from a Christian perspective. The phone number here is 801-973-TV20. That's 801-973-8820. We have with us Mrs. Sabrina Reynolds, an educator who's been very kind to join us. Now, before we move into criticizing the current system,
right?
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment here.
Yes.
Since I'm going to be questioning public education, I must be an evil person who is accusing every teacher of gross evil, right?
No, not at all. In fact, teachers are a product of the system. That was one of the first things that they did to set up the system that we have now, are to open teacher colleges. And so you love children and you want to make a difference in a child's life. What better way to do it than become a teacher? You go to the teacher college, they show, they tell you what's important. and then the cycle starts itself all over again. And there are lots of teachers out there. John Gatto is probably one of my favorite people to mention because he's written so many books. So won Teacher of the Year in the state of New York a couple of times, and he became so disillusioned. He saw what was happening and he knew it was wrong, and yet he just trudged through it. And after 30 years, when he retired, he was like, no more, So there are teachers out there who are doing great things in the public school system despite what they've been given as well. And I know, I can't even count how many teachers that I know make a real difference and work outside of the box. And the box is kind of tight, by the way.
Yeah, because the control is not through the PTA, is it?
There's not really, but there's some issue with the PTA.
Well, basically, you have the NEA.
The NEA is big, yes.
And the folks who are in control in the NEA have a very definite worldview.
Yes.
Would you say that it's favorable towards Christianity by and large?
No, probably not by and large. I think that a big initiative, and again, you don't want controversy in your school, so you have to have everything equal. And I think that getting God and getting religion and getting the Bible and Bible study out was key to moving the initiative forward, because now you have students being taught secular humanism in the school system, and they go home to their Christian families and they get 3 hours at home with their Christian families after they spent 8 or 9 hours at school getting Christian or secular humanism. And so it's a juxtaposition. And as a Christian myself, I struggle with that. I look at that environment and say, this isn't healthy for my child.
I'm going to say something you probably haven't heard before. I think you're way too optimistic. Because the 8 or 9 hours that they're spending in the public school system is very focused on an agenda. Whereas the 3 hours at home, how much time do the average parents actually spend? I mean, I'm not looking for statistics here, but I mean, I think I've seen numbers that in terms of one-on-one conversation, fathers typically spend something like 45 seconds a day with a child.
Yeah.
And you compare that to sitting in a classroom listening to hour after hour after hour of indoctrination. And this is what I want to ask you about, because I had some people thought I was over the top when I said that the public school system was the madrasas of secularism, but I see this as a religious system that is just as powerful as medieval Roman Catholicism ever was. That you have this religion, that it has its worldview, it has its creation story, it has its priesthood, which the high priests are in the university systems, especially in the schools of education.
Right.
It's assumed that in order to teach a child to read and write, you have to have been admitted into the priesthood. You have to have your teaching certificate.
Yes, you have to be certified. Yep.
Is it your belief that a person needs to be certified in order to teach reading?
No, I don't think so, because there are moms who teach their kids to read before they're 3, and they're not certified by the state to do so. And I think certification is just another form of bureaucracy that can be cut out, and it doesn't really hold much water, considering, if we look at the state of affairs, we've got all these certified teachers, and our schools are failing. We're dropping worldwide.
Actually, our students start off fairly high,
They
don't
do.
they?
Yes, they do.
But the more time they spend in the public school system, the further they drop.
Yeah, and a lot of people have said that it's due to the summer breaks that our kids get, and there have been studies that show that they are way up here, and then the other nations, like, especially Asian countries, move up a little, and then after summer, our kids catch up and they nudge up a little, but then you can't, pretty soon you can't fix that gap anymore. And I don't know if after reading and researching more, if I buy into the theory of summer vacation. I think that we could probably structure our breaks a little differently so that our students don't have such a big loss, a gap in learning. But I always come back to the idea that they're told what is important. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you never really advance. You never really get that chance to dig deeper. There's no depth to it. It's all about brevity and moving through a chapter, getting on to the next topic.
And in terms of that very cursory view, kids are not taught that evolution is just one theory, are
No,
they?
no, and I actually, I have issue with that. They're not taught that evolution is a theory at all. It's almost like the law of gravity. It's become the thing that is the explanation for the creation of life. And there's a couple of other things that I hear kids talk about, and evolution is the one I'm like, it's a theory. There are a couple of other things that we can consider. Creationism is one, but we're looking at people who take global warming, that's the other one. It's not a theory, it is actually a thing. It's the global warming law now. I don't want to touch on, don't want to get off topic, but it's the same sort of line of thinking that something just becomes, and you're told in the school that it is, and you go home and tell your parents it is, and if your parents say no, it's not, then...
People complain about how narrow sometimes religious people can be, but in the public school system, in this whole framework of it being of a state religion, and these priesthoods and all, they don't have a whole lot of tolerance for heresy, do they?
No.
I mean, if someone questions global warming in the classroom or questions evolution,
Yes.
does that have repercussions?
Well, I have been told personally, and I want my students to have as much knowledge as they can, and I've been told personally that I have to watch what I say to my students, and I have been told that. You need to watch what you say, Sabrina. And I'm like, hush, okay, but I don't know why, because this is just more information for my students, and they have a mind. They can weigh two different perspectives and make their own choices. But yes, I don't know if teachers... I don't know any teachers personally who have been fired, but I do know that people have been spoken to about the topics that come up in their classrooms.
I'm going to open up the phone lines again.
Sure.
If anyone would like to join the conversation, we have with us Mrs. Sabrina Reynolds, and the phone number here is 801-973-TV20. That's 801-973-8820. A lot of people see the public school system as a failure because it's not giving a good education to the students.
Right.
You have a student that learns to read at 3 years old. They actually discourage that because that just means they're going to be bored while everyone else in their class is learning this.
Right.
Because they all have to be regimented. They all have to be in the same...
Did you read the book To Kill a Mockingbird?
No.
The little character of Scout, that's something that she shares. Her teacher in first grade tells her that she's not allowed to read in class because she's not supposed to be able to read at 6. And so, I mean, there's so many anecdotal things like that, but yeah.
But the public school system, if you recognize that it actually is set up to be this means of socialization
Yes.
into a statist system, it's a rousing success.
Yes.
Because people can't even imagine a world without public education. And yet, we had one.
Yes.
And the answer to whether it's Republican or Democrat, the answer seems to be to throw more money at education. We just don't have enough money. We don't have enough money. We need greater skill sets. We need greater teacher incentives and things.
Right.
I'm curious for your take in terms of the breakdown of order within the schools. To me, it seems like a natural consequence of telling children that they're animals, telling them that there is no right and wrong. There is no reason to respect any kind of tradition. And so if they want to call you by your first name or call you some pejorative, whoopee.
Right.
I mean, have you seen that kind of thing in your classes or
I have been lucky enough to not, but I've heard, I did my student teaching at a public school in Memphis, Tennessee, where I was 22 years old and, walking through the halls and getting the cat calls and the, rude gestures and and it was a little bit, it set me a little off I was not very easy, a little on edge. But I've been very lucky here in Utah. I've only had one or two students that I felt like got out of line with me, and I set them straight very quickly. I'm very, from the South, I'm very big on that. And so, but I've heard horror stories. I've heard stories of teachers getting shoved against walls by students and having to have, and the kid won't be suspended from the class or move to another class because this is the only option that they have at the school. So then the teacher will be walked to and from her car by security. I don't find that a good environment. And quite frankly, when people tell me, and when I taught in the private school sector, and people told me, when do we throw our kids into the real world, I asked them, how often do you, mingle with 2,000 people? Ever? In our daily lives, we are in close contact, intimate contact with 10 people in an office, and if you work in a corporation, maybe 30 people in your area, and we're throwing our children into a warehouse of 2,000 kids. It makes no sense to me, and it doesn't seem like reality. It's some sort of weird science fiction.
These tendencies towards the public school system being what it is have existed for 150 years, but a lot of people don't seem to understand that it's really only in the last generation and a half that it has really coalesced around this idea of being this place where children are really socialized into being this kind of cattle. Yeah. And we have study after study showing that evangelical churches are losing their youth within a year of graduating high school at a rate of somewhere between 80 and 85%. And yet we keep hearing parents say, oh, if I don't send my kids to public school, they won't be socialized. If I don't, they're going to be witnesses.
Right.
What would be your feedback?
Well, I go back to that again, social skills are not born in a classroom, first of all. They come from your family. If you are a child, and also your personality, by the way. I was an only child. I had no playmates. I went to a private school with 13 other kids in my class for the first 3 years of my life, for the first 3 years of my schooling, and then to public school. And I can tell you, it didn't change, it didn't have an effect on me at all. I was who I was. And my parents forged that personality for me. And so I find the whole idea of socializing as a means to why public schools are great, I find it just almost humorous, because what are they getting from these peer groups that they're socializing with? They come back, they backtalk, they're slacking, they're skipping school, and maybe you are the lucky parent and your kid finds that good group of kids, and then they are just picked on constantly, about their beliefs, but maybe they're very religious and they're called goody two-shoes or whatever. It's just it's a crazy environment to me, and I don't want my children, in that sort of environment.
It seems like a strange concept to people that nowhere else in their lives are they surrounded by people who were born in the same year.
Right.
That
it's odd. Yes.
They're segregated in this artificial way. And I think what we've done is we've created this artificial peer group that, whereas the family and the church used to be the groups where children would learn their values and decide what was important. Now we're sticking them into this artificial environment where the marketers have figured out a way to tap into this. And whereas my kids hardly ever heard of Britney Spears growing up, yet she was this, iconic character for kids in public school. Now it's Miley Cyrus and whoever else. Thankfully, I don't have to keep up that much on these things. But if we don't want to take our children and drop them off in East LA on a Saturday night and say, see you in the morning, go witness to everybody.
Right.
Then why would we drop them off at a public school?
Right. And the thing that I think is most troubling to me is that in that environment, if your child is one of the kids that's going to go out and share and profess their faith and share their values and beliefs, they're probably not going to be welcomed, and I think is more harmful than good when you're in such a fragile stage already in your development. And then you're thrown in, it's just like thrown to the wolves, like literally thrown to the wolves, I can tell you. And I don't know, I think that there are better ways to do that. And allowing a child to go on a mission trip with a church group, I think that's where there's a safe environment and there's someone there to protect your child, because you're not there when you send them to witness in a school. You send them out to, go and share your beliefs. And it's a very harsh environment. And I know firsthand, public school environment.
A lot of parents are made to feel guilty that if they withdraw their kids, things are going to be worse for the kids who are left behind. But do we really want to put our children's souls at risk?
Right.
For what good they might do? I mean, and it's always put forward as an either or.
Right.
But one of the things I want to move on to is that there are actually better options
Yes.
becoming available now.
Yes, online school is great. There's also online Christian options that are available. And this new thing has been popping up around the country is homeschool co-oping, where families get together and they trade off days or host children at their homes different weeks or whatever, so that parents can not just be, saddled with the responsibility of, oh my gosh, I have my kids here, and the kids get a little more social time within that safe environment and the safe confound. So I would recommend to parents who might be afraid that if they pull their kid out, then the little group of kids that their child socializes with will suffer. Maybe talking about a co-op or getting some sort of online option available and doing it yourself. Community schools are what founded and fostered the growth of this nation, and I really think we could get back to it very easily, especially with the internet now and everything that's available to us.
I've been really surprised. My son was able to study Calculus 3 over the summer with an MIT instructor. Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's online, it's free. And he was able to watch all the lectures just as if he had been in the class. Mm-hmm. And it seems as if not only can we replicate what's in the public school system, we can do so much better.
I think so.
And I long to see these things brought together where parents know the resources that are available. Mm-hmm. And then also where there's also a diversity of views and criticism, that what the professor is saying is not put forward as unquestionable. Because you don't get to ask in a public school, well, what about this, do you?
Right.
I mean, we were talking, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but we were talking before the show started about the popular picture that's put forward of the Civil War.
Right.
And it's propaganda. There was evil on both sides, but the idea that Lincoln fought the war to free the slaves, it just doesn't stand up to reality, does it?
No, especially when he said in his own words that wasn't his priority, but preserving the Union was.
They also ignore a whole host of other facts, but it's basically just a place where the state propaganda is force-fed our children.
Yes.
And because they're learning a little bit of English and math along the way, we think that's a good thing.
Right.
But what do you see coming in terms of the open source and online alternatives?
Well, I personally think that the state of Utah is driving forward in education reform, tons of things in our state. And I think that people in Utah have a lot to look forward to if they're brave enough to step up and say, yeah, we're gonna kick the federal government out of our school system. We're not gonna listen to what you guys tell us we need to do for our children, and we're going to take control, bring back the whole idea of agency of a parent and a child having a choice and control over their own lives is very important. And just like lots of big good things happening in Utah. if we can push it forward, I think that a trend might happen across the United States. But right now, it seems like the online school is the best option for parents who are looking for a way to homeschool their kids without spending a ton of money and without having to go and research the curriculum and put together the programs and all of that on their own. And while I think supplementation is necessary, it's one of the best options right now.
We had a school voucher referendum a few years back, and it was put forward that basically we spend X number of dollars per student. If a student wants to go outside of the system, we'll send half those dollars with them and keep half the money in the system so that we have fewer students and there's more money per student for those who remain.
Right.
But you would have thought that we were trying to kill children from the response of the UEA, wouldn't
Right.
you? I think that public education made it impossible for people to grasp that concept.
Yes.
Anyway, we're going to take our first call. We have Rob from Salt Lake. Good to have you with us, Rob. Hello? Rob, you're on the air. Hello, Rob.
Speaking. Hello.
You're on the air. Go ahead.
My name is Rob. I'm a private contractor. I've worked with the 3 largest school districts in Utah for a long time. Nothing was talked about the business end of this. My understanding is American schools are the 2nd largest funded schools in the world, but we're probably somewhere in the teens in production. These schools districts are what's called a political subdivision. That means they're their own entity, and the only power overseeing them is the Attorney General's office, which is way too busy to oversee them. And there's a lot of bidding and things going on that probably shouldn't go on. It's built to keep people in place. There needs to be an analysis of how things are done in other school districts and other countries. I wonder if anybody's aware of the money that's spent in the shops. The school districts here, Jordan School District, Granite School District, Alpine, Davis, etc., all have huge shops, plumbing shops, carpentry shops, electronic shops. The last studies I saw on those said that for every dollar that they spend on their own plumbers to maintain their schools, it could have been done for close to a tenth if it was put out to the public companies to do it. They're very unproductive, they're very cumbersome, and they are absolutely socialistic.
Rob, I understand. When you create this kind of power, it's natural that it's going to corrupt people and it's going to attract corrupt people, and a lot of other folks are going to get swept along with it because they can't do much about it. I think every time you create this kind of centralized power, you're going to have this kind of corruption. And anytime you question it, they're just going to say you just hate children. But what are your ideas?
Well, I know I'm not very familiar with the economic side of the education, but I do know just from my own research that schools get money for lots of things. Like every child that's on an ADD medication is extra money for a school, and so teachers were sort of prompted to recommend that parents have their child tested for ADD. And so I know that the money is important, and there's lots of different ways that they filter it in, but I don't really know much about the other end.
What is it they call those students that have to get the medicine? Boys?
Yeah, all boys.
Basically, all boys have to be medicated because
Yes.
they don't conform to the model. Our next call is from Clark in Salt Lake. Clark, good to have you with us.
Yes, I'd just like to present a statement, and I'd like to hear her response.
Okay.
Why is the educational system and in the greater society, why has adjectives basically dropped, and now the new modifier is the noun? 3 examples: education system, budget cut, and management skills, and all 3 of those are wrong. I'd like to hear your comments. Thank you.
I'm not, Clark,
Oh,
do you understand what he was saying?
I think it's linguistics. I think that you're asking why the modifiers have been shifted, and I am not certain. I just know that our English language is always, it's a living language, and so it's always changing and transitioning according to mostly slang and misuse. So if we have an education system that isn't really focusing on grammar skills, which I think I might have mentioned to you earlier, Jason, that my students didn't know what a noun and verb were in 6th grade, and I thought that was very crazy. But if we continue to push this along, then we're just going to see a trend of our language shrinking, actually. And so if you're shrinking your language, then modifiers aren't as important anymore. And we'll actually, I think if this progresses, it's almost like 1984. And I love to use Orwell. He's one of my favorite authors. But he talks about the Newspeak, and it's just a very abbreviated form of language because using words like very isn't important anymore. So.
Yeah, and it actually tends to support the public school system to keep changing the language. I mean, in terms of they become the caretakers of what's appropriate.
And the correct way to speak.
Yes, and it seems to keep changing according to their standards. I mean, it's not just that they're reflecting changes in the culture; they're creating the changes.
Right, and adopting new speech patterns and writing patterns. I taught honors lit classes, and I was lucky enough to have a group of teachers underneath me that tried, to focus on structure and critical writing and things like that. But it was amazing what, in 3 years, my students were producing college-level papers from 6th, 7th to 8th grade, college-level papers, only because we focused on it. And if you don't focus on it, you lose it, unfortunately.
The power of jargon, I think, fits with this whole thing that this is a priesthood, this is a religion, because they keep changing the very terms of education, don't they? I mean, we were talking about psycholinguistics and whole word and look say, and
right.
If you don't use the proper term, then you show that you're not in the loop.
Well, and what's crazy to me is they changed okay, everyone knows how to write a paper. You have your feet in line, right, your introductory line, and then you have your body, and then you have like your conclusion, right? Well, there's all these new things now. There's a tree. There's like a spool of thread with a spindle. There's all these crazy, and it's all the same thing, but the language changes. And if you're a teacher who's like up with the current lingo, then you now teach your kids how to write a 5-paragraph essay using the spool technique or the tree technique or whatever. But it's all arbitrary. There's no real meaning or substance behind any of it. But you can go sit in a 2 or 3 hour class and they'll teach you the exact same classroom management skills you learned 2 years ago, but all of it has new labels. So,
for those who are considering homeschooling,
yes,
they don't have the resources to send their kids to a private school, but they're looking at making sacrifices, and they're intimidated. You've taught in public, private schools. You have a master's in education. They've been told that they're not qualified.
Right.
What would you say?
I think that parents are the most qualified, actually, and I've found them to be my teaching partners, and I don't know what I would do without them, especially, the parents who are really involved. And I just say, you taught your child to walk, you taught your child to speak, how to hold a fork, how to dress, how to tie their shoe. So, you've taught your child all of these things, and you weren't a certified teacher. So I don't believe in state certification. I think that people are called to teach and not trained to teach. And that's another thing for me, is that my passion comes from within me and not because I have a piece of paper. And I really didn't think my certification meant that much anyways. I have it, so there you go. But parents shouldn't be intimidated, and there's a wealth of resources out there. And I say just hop online and see what fits best.
And just in the moment we've got left here, for those who say, all right, well, I think I can handle the lower grades.
Right.
In terms of the new rulings where kids can come to the public school more as a cafeteria and pick some of the classes they take, do parents have to send their kids to high school in order to get a good education in things like calculus and chemistry and such?
I really don't think so. If you take Galileo did not have a teacher. Do you know, if we look back at the great minds in history, we see that there was not this system of education there, and yet amazing things happened. Ben Franklin, product of his own education, right? Thomas Jefferson, same thing. So if we're taking a look back, I don't think that we should worry about it, especially with what's out there now. And just it's a wealth of information. The internet is amazing.
Well, Ms. Reynolds, unfortunately, we're running out of time,
Okay.
but it has been a pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks.
This show is sponsored by Christ Presbyterian Church. We are a congregation of the Orthodox Presbyterian denomination. We believe the Bible is our only infallible rule of faith and practice. We believe that we are sinners saved by grace alone, through faith alone, in Jesus Christ alone. We invite you to worship with us Sunday mornings at 11 a.m., Sunday evenings at 5:30 p.m. at 8630 West, 2700 South. That's Main Street, Magna. If you would like more information, you can go to our website, www.christpres.net. We also have a sister church up in Ogden, Berean Presbyterian. They meet at 9 a.m. at 3350 Harrison Boulevard. That's up next to Weber State in Ogden. And we also have a Bible study down in Utah County. If you'd like more information, you can go to the website as I mentioned. You can see past episodes at www.ancientpaths.tv, and you can also give us a call at 801-969-7948. We stand for the historic faith once for all delivered to the saints. We hope that as people in the past went back to the Bible and re-examined the traditions of their age, that we will do the same in ours, and that we will re-examine turning our children over to the state to raise for us, and hopefully go back to the faith of our fathers. Till next time, we wish you the Lord's greatest blessings. Good night.